Good evening, and welcome back to SleepWise. If these gentle stories help you rest, you can follow the channel and share an episode with someone you care about so the calm can travel a little farther than tonight. Tonight, we drift toward a word that has wandered through centuries and languages, changing clothes as it goes, yet keeping the same quiet posture. The sense that what we do matters and that it leaves a trace. Not a thunderbolt, not a scoreboard in the sky, but something subtler, like a footprint in soft sand, or the faint ring a bell leaves in the air after the sound has already gone. Many people call that idea karma, and while the word is ancient, the feeling is familiar, even if you have never used it before. You notice it when kindness returns in unexpected ways, when impatience multiplies, when a small lie needs more lies to hold it up, or when an apology, simple, honest, seems to loosen a knot you've carried all day. In some traditions, karma is a moral law woven into the universe, an order as steady as seasons. In others, it is not cosmic at all, but intensely practical. The way choices shape character, the way habits shape attention, and the way attention shapes the life you feel yourself living. And in the great Abrahamic faiths, you find neighboring language about accountability, about sowing and reaping, about returning to what is right, about justice tempered with mercy. Different frames, but often a similar invitation to act with fairness, to repair what can be repaired, and to leave the rest to God. Tonight, we won't argue over whose frame is correct. Instead, we'll hold the idea like a warm cup between both hands and simply look at it from a few gentle angles: cultural, spiritual, and scientific. Because the mind, too, has its own way of registering consequences. Somewhere beneath your thoughts, your brain keeps quiet notes on trust and threat, on reciprocity and repair, on the comfort of being treated well, and the unease of having treated someone poorly. It learns patterns, it predicts outcomes, and it tries, sometimes clumsily, to keep you safe within a social world where your actions echo back to you through other people's faces. So, as the room darkens and your breathing begins to lengthen, imagine a still lake at night. A single pebble drops, and the water answers with rings that widen, soften, and fade. You don't need to relive every mistake or tally every good deed, for now you only need to feel the simple truth that a gentle life tends to create gentler rooms, and that fairness, quiet, steady fairness, can be its own kind of shelter. In the same way, tonight, we'll follow the rings of a single question. How do humans, across faith and culture and biology, come to believe that goodness matters? And what does that belief do to the nervous system that carries you into sleep? And to follow those rings, it helps to start with something very small, a definition that doesn't demand belief, only attention. The word karma comes from a root that simply means action, and in its gentlest form, karma is the idea that actions have consequences. Not only the obvious consequences you can point to in daylight: trust gained, trust lost, doors opened, doors closed, but the quieter consequences that settle inside you like sediment in water. A harsh word can travel outward, yes, but it can also travel inward, teaching your mind to speak harshly in your own direction. A generous act can ease someone's evening, but it can also soften your sense of separation, as if the boundary between me and you becomes less rigid for a moment. So karma, in this soft sense, is not a threat. It is a description of how patterns are made, how momentum builds, and how the present is always, in some small way, stitched from what came before. If you have ever felt that certain days go your way, not because the universe likes you more, but because you are moving with steadier patience, you have already felt a kind of karma. And if you have ever watched one careless choice multiply into a messy hour, you have felt it too. It's tempting to turn karma into a cosmic courtroom with a judge and a sentence. But many teachings spend a surprising amount of time on something simpler: intention. Because two actions can look identical from the outside, yet land very differently inside the person who did them and in the world they touched. You can give to be seen, or you can give to relieve a burden. You can tell the truth to wound, or you can tell the truth to clear the air. Over time, intention becomes a kind of inner weather, shaping what you notice, how you interpret a stranger's face, and what your body expects from tomorrow. And because the mind loves coherence, it often strings consequences into a story of fairness. Sometimes that story is practical. People respond to warmth, and they recoil from cruelty. Sometimes it is simply the mind arranging randomness into a pattern it can hold. Either way, the sensation matters. Your nervous system relaxes when life feels repairable and tenses when it feels arbitrary. So tonight, we'll treat karma as both a cultural teaching and a psychological comfort, a way humans have tried to name the link between choice and experience, so the future feels less like a storm and more like a path you can walk, one quiet step at a time. If you like, picture an invisible thread running from each small act to the next hour. Not a chain, not a sentence, just a thread, reminding you that even tiny shifts, one kinder sentence, one fairer decision, can change the shape of a whole evening. Because it is less about judgment and more about learning how to move through life with fewer sharp corners, so the mind has less to brace against when it finally tries to rest. When people first began to speak about karma in the Indian philosophical world, they were speaking into a landscape filled with long memory. Time was not always pictured as a straight line, but often as cycles, and life as a classroom where lessons could be revisited. In early layers, karma was tied to ritual action, to the sense that acts performed with care helped sustain order. But as centuries passed, the idea widened beyond ritual into ethics, and beyond ethics into the inner life. In many Hindu traditions, karma becomes intertwined with dharma, the sense of Right living, right duty, right alignment. Dharma can mean different things in different contexts. Cosmic order, social responsibility, personal integrity, but in every case, it is an attempt to live without tearing the fabric of the world. When you act against that fabric, the thinking goes, you create friction, and friction creates heat, conflict, regret, instability that you eventually feel. When you act with Dharma, you create flow. Not a guarantee that every day will be easy, but a sense that your life is less at war with itself. And woven through many strands is the thought that outcomes do not always arrive immediately. Some consequences bloom quickly, like a bruise. Others appear slowly, like a habit you didn't notice you were building until it had built you. This is where karma becomes less like lightning and more like gardening. What you plant does not become a tree overnight, but the soil remembers. Across centuries, people debated what karma means and how it works, with different schools emphasizing duty, renunciation, devotion, or philosophy. For SleepWise, the soothing part is not the debate. It is the shared insight that the present is not isolated. It grows out of yesterday's choices the way dawn grows out of night, gradually, without announcing itself. And this is why the language of fruits appears so often. Fruits are not demanded from a tree in a single afternoon. They arrive when the season is ready. So, if you feel impatient with your own progress, if you wish you were already calmer, already wiser, you can borrow that older rhythm. Keep choosing the small, steady actions. Keep watering the roots, and let time do what time does, quietly, while you rest. In some Hindu thought, this patient rhythm is paired with the reminder that you can act wholeheartedly without clinging to results. It is the difference between rowing and trying to command the river. When you release the demand to control outcomes, the chest often softens and effort becomes quieter. So, as you settle deeper into the pillow, let the ancient image do its work. You tend what you can tend. You plant what you can plant. And you allow the rest, weather, timing, other people's choices, to arrive in its own season. From there, the story drifts toward Buddhism, where karma becomes even more intimate, less about cosmic accounting and more about the training of the mind. In many Buddhist teachings, the heart of karma is intention, because intention is what shapes the mind's habits. A mind that repeatedly grasps becomes skilled at grasping. A mind that repeatedly resents becomes skilled at finding reasons to resent. And a mind that repeatedly practices compassion becomes, little by little, more at home in compassion. This is not magic, and it does not require you to imagine a universe handing out prizes. It is closer to the way water shapes stone. The stone does not deserve the groove. The groove appears because the water keeps returning to the same path. Buddhist texts often connect karma to suffering and its easing, to the fact that certain patterns reliably tighten the mind and certain patterns reliably soften it. Greed, hatred, and confusion are sometimes described as fires, not to shame you, but to name what they do. They burn the person carrying them, and the alternative is not moral perfection. It is awareness. You notice the moment before the sharp word leaves your mouth. You notice the craving that promises relief but delivers restlessness. You notice the story that insists you are either superior or inferior when you are simply human. Karma, in this framing, is the gentle physics of attention. What you feed grows. What you practice strengthens. Even the smallest repetition matters because the nervous system learns by rehearsal. A single breath of patience is not nothing. It is a vote. Some Buddhist traditions speak about karma across lifetimes, while others focus more on what is immediate and observable. Tonight, we don't need to settle that question. We only need to notice what you can test in your own experience. When you act with cruelty, even in imagination, the body tightens. When you act with care, even in a small way, the body often loosens. The jaw unclenches. The breath finds the belly. So, if your day has been heavy, let tonight be one gentle repetition in the other direction. One breath that doesn't hurry. One thought that doesn't accuse. One soft return to the present, as if you are teaching your mind a new way to come home. In that sense, karma becomes less like fate and more like craftsmanship. You are shaping your inner instrument, one small stroke at a time. And as the instrument changes, the same world can sound different, less like a threat, more like a place where you can breathe. Let that be enough for now, a gentle reassurance that the mind is not fixed. It is trainable, and training can be tender. So tonight, no pressure to be perfect, only an invitation to be a little gentler. A third stream, clear and uncompromising, flows through Jain thought, where karma is described with extraordinary seriousness, and yet the practice it inspires can feel surprisingly tender. Jain traditions emphasize ahimsa, or non-harm, as a guiding star. It asks for gentleness in thought, word, and action, not only in obvious actions, but in the quiet, everyday ways harm can slip into the world, through carelessness, through impatience, through treating a living being as if it does not matter. In this view, the lightest life is the life that steps softly. And that softness is not weakness. It is precision. It is attention so careful that it becomes peaceful. Jain descriptions of karma can sound almost physical, as if actions leave a residue that weighs the soul. Whether you take that literally or metaphorically, the felt lesson is simple. Harm is heavy. It burdens the one who causes it, and it spreads into the space between people like smoke. So the response is not fear, but discipline. A disciplined gentleness. A commitment to truthfulness, restraint, and compassion, practiced not for applause, but for clarity. And again, the traditions keep circling the same quiet point. Kindness is not only something you owe, it is something that changes you. Fairness is not only a social rule, it is a way of living that keeps your inner world less turbulent. Even when no one is watching, the body is watching. Your pulse, your breathing, your muscles, they register when you are in conflict with your own values. And they register too when you act in a way that aligns. So the bedtime lesson here is not grand. It is practical. Reduce harm, reduce friction, reduce the need for inner argument. Choose actions you can stand behind. Repair what you break, and let your mind become a calmer place to live. And if this sounds demanding, remember the softness underneath it. The aim is not to become flawless. The aim is to become less harmful, a little more honest, a little more fair, so that life contains fewer moments that need to be defended. Because defense is exhausting, and when defense relaxes, sleep has an easier doorway. You can feel it in the simplest moments. When you treat someone with kindness, the body often feels safer, as if the world has fewer traps. When you treat someone unfairly, even if you get away with it, the mind tends to stay awake, listening for consequences. This is not superstition. It is the nervous system keeping notes. With that doorway in mind, we can now drift toward the Abrahamic languages of consequence. Sowing and reaping, justice and mercy, repentance and repair. Quiet cousins of the same human longing for moral coherence. Now we cross a gentle bridge, because even when a tradition does not use the word karma, it often speaks in a familiar grammar, that actions matter, that the world answers, and that a life can be repaired. In Judaism, moral life is often pictured as a lived relationship with justice and responsibility, not only as private belief. There is a calm emphasis on deeds, how you treat the vulnerable, how you conduct business, how you speak when you could easily wound. And alongside law and ethics, there is a human practicality. If something has been harmed, it can be mended. One of the central ideas is teshuvah, often translated as return. It is the sense that you can turn back toward what is right, not in a theatrical way, but in a steady way, as if you are walking home after wandering. Teshuvah is not only regret, it includes recognition, naming what happened without excuses, then remorse, then a change of direction, and, when possible, making amends with the person you harmed. That last part matters, because repair is not just an inner feeling. It is relational. If you took something, you return it. If you damaged trust, you rebuild it with consistency, through actions that match your words. There is also the wider idea of tzedakah, often translated as charity, but carrying a sense of justice, helping others not as optional generosity, but as part of a fair world. So consequence is not imagined only as what comes back to you. It is also what you contribute forward to keep the fabric of community from tearing. And there are seasons of reflection built into the calendar, times when many pause, take inventory, and ask where they have been truthful and where they have fallen short. The point is not self-punishment. It is clearing the air, because wrongdoing is not treated as a permanent identity. A mistake is not the whole self. What matters is the movement back toward integrity and the willingness to restore what was disturbed. That is a kind of moral physics you can feel in your own chest. When you have made amends, sleep comes more easily because the mind no longer needs to rehearse defenses. And when you have not, the mind often circles, restless, searching for a way to close the loop. So, if you've carried a small regret into bed tonight, let this be a gentle lantern. Repair is lighter than replay. Even a simple message, even a quiet acknowledgement can change the weight of a memory. And if repair is not possible because time has passed or the person is gone, there is still the inward work of returning, a commitment to fairness in the next moment, a softer word where you might have sharpened it, a decision to treat a stranger with dignity as a living form of repair. It is not cosmic punishment, and it is not cosmic reward. It is the slow restoration of order inside a life. And that restoration has a sound, like a room settling after a door closes, and finally, quiet. From that sense of return, we drift into Christian language, where consequence and mercy often sit side by side like two candles on the same table, lighting the same room. In the New Testament, love is described not as a mood, but as a practice, patient, kind, not keeping a tally of wrongs. And yet the moral world is not pictured as weightless. There is the familiar phrase about sowing and reaping, the quiet reminder that what you plant tends to grow. If you plant generosity, you often grow relationships that feel safer. If you plant contempt, you often grow distance, suspicion, and loneliness. This is not presented as a mechanical vending machine, where good deeds guarantee good days. Christian teaching spends a great deal of time acknowledging hardship that is not deserved and suffering that arrives without explanation. So, the idea of consequence is balanced by the idea of grace, unearned favor, mercy offered not because you have perfectly earned it, but because love chooses to give. And grace is not meant to erase responsibility. It is meant to make responsibility possible. Because when you believe you can be forgiven, you are less likely to hide and more likely to face what you have done with honesty. In that way, grace becomes a kind of oxygen. It lets you breathe while you repair. Christian tradition also includes a strong call to reconciliation, making peace with others, seeking forgiveness, offering it where you can, and resisting the temptation to live on a diet of resentment. There is a practical wisdom here that works even outside theology. Forgiveness can be a release of the grip, not a denial of harm. It is the difference between carrying a hot stone and setting it down. And there is another strand that quietly echoes karma's emphasis on inner formation. In the Christian imagination, the heart is shaped by repeated choices. What you practice becomes what feels natural. So the invitation is not simply behave better. It is to become slowly a different kind of person, the kind who can choose kindness when tired, fairness when tempted, restraint when provoked. That kind of transformation is described in spiritual language, but it matches a human reality you can feel. Repeated actions become identity, and identity becomes future action. So tonight, we hold this gently. Consequence is real, but it is not the final word. Repair is real, but it does not require perfection. Mercy is real, and it does not cancel justice. It softens the path back to it. And for a sleeping mind, that is soothing, because the fear of being trapped by your worst moment is one of the loudest sounds in the dark. Grace, however you understand it, turns down that volume, so rest can begin. And now, as if the night itself is turning a page, we come to Islam, where the moral life is often spoken of in terms of deeds, intention, and a justice that is never separated from mercy. A person's actions matter, yes, but so does what sits behind them, the inward aim, the direction of the heart. There is a well-known emphasis on niyyah, intention, because the same outward act can hold different moral weight depending on why it was done. You can give to be praised, or you can give to relieve someone's burden. You can speak the truth to humiliate, or you can speak it to protect what is right. This attention to intention makes the moral world feel less like theater and more like sincerity. Islamic ethics also speaks often about fairness in dealings, honesty in trade, keeping promises, paying what is owed, not taking advantage when you have power. Justice is treated as a responsibility, a way of keeping balance in a life that can easily tip toward selfishness. And alongside justice is the encouragement to do what is beautiful, not only what is required, but what is graceful. It is not an abstract spirituality floating above daily life. It is a spirituality that walks through markets and homes, through friendships and family, through the way you treat a person who can offer you nothing in return. And, like the other Abrahamic traditions, there is accountability. There is the sense that deeds are recorded, not to provoke panic, but to keep life serious in the best way. Serious enough to be careful with harm, serious enough to value repair. Yet accountability is paired again and again with mercy. Mercy is described as vast, and forgiveness as something you can seek with humility and hope. The path back is often described as a turning. You acknowledge, you regret, you stop, you try again. That pairing does something gentle to the nervous system. If you believe you can return, you are less likely to despair. If you believe mercy exists, you are less likely to harden. And there is also the practice of gratitude, which is more than politeness. Gratitude is described as a form of recognition, seeing what has been given and responding with care. A grateful mind tends to soften. So even here, far from the word karma, the same quiet patterns appear: action, consequence, intention, repair, restraint, and kindness. Not as a random list of rules, but as a path that makes a life lighter. Because when you live justly, you reduce the number of loose ends your mind has to chase at night. And when you live kindly, you reduce the need for vigilance, yours and everyone else's. So tonight, we let these teachings sit together without competition. Different languages, different revelations, different metaphors, yet often a shared human hope that goodness is not wasted, that harm is not invisible, and that the door back to what is right is never locked. When you set these traditions side by side in the quiet, you begin to see a shared silhouette, like mountains that look different from each valley, yet belong to the same range. Each one, in its own language, treats human beings as morally significant, not because we are perfect, but because our choices ripple outward, shaping the life of others and shaping the kind of person we become. Each one speaks about restraint, the ability to pause before harm. Each one speaks about honesty, not as a brand, but as a way of keeping reality intact. Each one speaks about fairness, the refusal to use power as a shortcut. And each one, in its own way, leaves room for mercy, because without mercy, accountability becomes despair. This is why kindness appears again and again, not as decoration, but as a kind of technology for living. It reduces conflict. It builds trust. It makes the future less hostile. You can see it in small things. A fair manager creates a calmer workplace. A considerate friend creates a safer conversation. A stranger who holds the door open changes the mood of a hallway. These are not miracles. They are atmosphere, and atmosphere is contagious. Of course, there are differences. Some traditions speak of karma across lifetimes. Some speak of judgment and the hereafter. Some focus on community repair in the present. But underneath the differences is a remarkably consistent intuition. The world is not only made of objects, it is made of relationships, and relationships have rules. If you ignore them, you pay in stress, loneliness, and instability. If you honor them, you pay too: effort, humility, patience. But the cost buys peace. At night, this matters, because sleep is not only biology. Sleep is permission, and permission is harder when you feel you have unfinished business with people, with truth, or with yourself. So, tonight, we're not trying to become saints. We're simply noticing the common wisdom that has traveled through many centuries. Treat people with dignity. Do not exploit. repair what you can, and let kindness be a default. And if you wonder why so many traditions converge on that advice, the answer may be partly spiritual and partly evolutionary and partly neurological. A group that rewards fairness tends to survive. A person who is trusted tends to suffer less. A nervous system that expects reciprocity relaxes more often than one that expects betrayal. So the moral teachings do not float above life. They plug into the body. They shape the muscles of the face, the posture of the shoulders, the depth of breathing. They shape whether the world feels like a place you can rest. And now, having gathered these shared principles like smooth stones in the palm, we can turn toward the science of how the brain registers all of this, how it tracks fairness, learns consequences, and builds the sense that what I do matters, even when nobody is watching. The brain, for all its mystery, is also an engine for learning, and much of its learning happens in the space between people. Long before you could explain ethics in words, your nervous system was already collecting evidence. Which faces felt safe, which voices meant comfort, which actions led to warmth, and which led to punishment, ridicule, or abandonment. So, when we talk about karma tonight, we can also talk about something you can measure in a laboratory, the way humans track fairness and consequence. Psychologists sometimes call it moral cognition, but you can think of it as the mind's fairness radar. It is the feeling that something is right or not right, often arriving before you can explain why. It flares when someone cuts in line. It glows when someone shares. It tightens the stomach when you watch a person being bullied, and it relaxes just a little when you see harm repaired. This radar is not perfect. It can be biased toward your own group. It can be fooled by appearances. It can mistake bad outcomes for bad people. But it exists for a reason. Humans are cooperative animals, and cooperation requires trust. Trust requires the ability to notice cheaters, reward helpers, and remember who did what. In modern language, you might call that reputation. In older language, you might call it consequence. Either way, the brain is quietly keeping score, not out of pettiness, but out of survival. And deep inside that scoring system is a simple mechanism: prediction. Your brain constantly predicts what will happen next. When reality matches the prediction, the body stays calm. When reality surprises you, the brain updates its model, and you feel it as a jolt, a shift in attention, a tightening, a need to understand. Scientists call that surprise a prediction error. You can feel it when someone you trust betrays you, or when someone you feared turns out to be kind. The brain adjusts, and the adjustment leaves an imprint. Over time, these imprints become expectations. Expectations become posture. Posture becomes mood. So, if you grew up in fairness, your nervous system may expect repair. If you grew up in chaos, your nervous system may expect the opposite. And this is where spiritual teachings and neuroscience begin to rhyme. When a tradition urges honesty, it isn't only offering moral advice. It is helping reduce the number of painful prediction errors you inflict on others. When it urges kindness, it is helping create social environments that feel predictable and safe. And when it urges repair, apology, restitution, return, it is offering a way to close open loops that keep the mind awake. Tonight, we'll keep this scientific lens gentle. No heavy diagrams. Just a calm walk through the mind's quiet accounting. How reward and stress, memory and empathy all combine to make certain actions feel light and others feel heavy as you drift toward sleep. One place this quiet accounting shows up is in the brain's reward system, the part of you that learns what to repeat. When something turns out better than expected, the brain releases a small signal that says, "Remember this." When something turns out worse than expected, it releases a different signal that says, "Be careful." Over time, those signals shape your preferences, your habits, and even your sense of what kind of world you live in. So, when you act with kindness and it's received well, your brain doesn't only store the memory as a pleasant moment. It stores it as a lesson. People can be safe. Connection can be worth the effort. Generosity can be rewarded with warmth. And when you act unfairly, and it backfires, an argument, a loss of trust, a cold silence, your brain stores that too, as a lesson you can feel in the chest. Some of this learning happens in parts of the brain that respond strongly to reward and motivation, and some happens in areas that help you evaluate social situations and moral meaning. You don't need to memorize their names tonight. It's enough to know that your brain treats social life as real life, as something that affects safety as surely as weather affects warmth. And because the brain is built for patterns, it often turns these lessons into a broader belief that the world is, at least sometimes, fair. Psychologists call one version of this the just world tendency, the mind's pull toward believing that good people get good outcomes and bad people get bad outcomes. It can be comforting because it suggests the future is navigable. If I do right, I'll be okay. But it can also be misleading because life contains randomness, illness, accidents, and misfortune that no one earned. So the mind's fairness radar, while useful, can sometimes become a harsh judge. It can whisper that a suffering person must have done something, because the alternative, meaningless pain, is harder to hold. This is one reason spiritual teachings often pair accountability with compassion. They acknowledge that actions matter, while also reminding us that we cannot always see the full story of another life. So tonight, we let the brain's wish for fairness be what it is, a desire for coherence. We don't have to force the world into a tidy story. We can choose a gentler story, a story where you act with fairness, not because it guarantees a smooth road, but because it makes you the kind of person who can walk any road with steadier breath. And in that steadiness, there is a different kind of karma, not cosmic, but embodied. A body that trusts itself sleeps more easily. A mind that knows it tried to be decent stops arguing with the dark. So if your thoughts are restless tonight, you can ask one soft question. What choice today would I be comfortable repeating tomorrow? Not because it will pay off, but because it keeps your inner life simple, and simplicity at bedtime is its own quiet reward. Another way the brain registers consequence is through memory. Not only the memory of events, but the memory of feelings. There is a kind of memory that stores facts, like names and dates, and there is a kind that stores the emotional flavor of a moment. When you remember being treated unfairly, the body often remembers too. The shoulders lift, the jaw tightens, the stomach turns. That is not weakness. That is your nervous system keeping a map of danger so you can avoid it next time. And the same is true in the other direction. When you remember being treated with care, the body can soften as if it has been given permission. A good teacher, a fair manager, a friend who listened, those memories are like warm stones the mind can hold in cold weather. This is why fairness matters so much, because unfairness is not only an idea, it is a sensation that can live in the body for years. And when unfairness is repaired, something remarkable happens. An apology that is sincere, an acknowledgement that is real, a restitution that is offered. These do not erase the past, but they change the present. They tell the nervous system the danger has been seen. That alone can reduce vigilance. It can lower the background hum of alertness that keeps people awake. So, when spiritual traditions encourage repentance, repair, and reconciliation, they are also, in a quiet way, giving instructions for nervous systems. They are pointing to the fact that unresolved harm keeps circulating like a draft in a room. Repair closes the window. There is also the social side of memory. Humans remember reputations. We store stories about who is safe and who is not, and we pass those stories along, often without noticing. In older cultures, reputation could be the difference between survival and isolation. Even now, reputation shapes opportunities, friendships, belonging. So, karma can be felt as the simple accumulation of social memory. What you do becomes what people expect, and what people expect becomes how they treat you. This is not mystical. It is social learning. And yet, it can feel mystical because the consequences often arrive later through many steps in ways you couldn't have predicted. A small act of kindness can echo through a chain of trust. A small act of harm can echo through a chain of caution. And in the quiet of night, your mind often reviews these chains. It replays conversations, rewrites lines, imagines different endings. This is the brain's attempt to learn, to do better next time. But it can also become rumination, a loop that offers no new information, only more heat. So tonight, we'll practice a gentle distinction. Learning is useful. Punishing yourself is not. If there is something to repair, you can plan one small step. And if there is nothing to repair, you can let the loop dissolve. The rest can wait for daylight. And with that permission, memory stops gripping so tightly and begins softly to let you go. To understand why some moral ideas feel so powerful, it helps to notice one more ingredient the brain carries into every social moment: empathy. Empathy is not only a tender emotion, it is a prediction skill. Your brain tries to model what another person feels so you can respond in a way that keeps the relationship stable. When empathy is working well, cruelty feels wrong not only because you were told it is wrong, but because your mind can simulate the pain you would cause. And when you witness kindness, something in you recognizes it as safety spreading through a room. Scientists can observe pieces of this in the brain as networks that respond to other people's emotions, to fairness, to harm, to relief. Again, the names are not important tonight. What matters is the felt reality. Your body reacts to other bodies. Your calm can calm someone else. Your impatience can ignite theirs. This is part of why moral teachings are often communal. They are not only about your private soul. They are about the atmosphere of a group. A society becomes livable when enough people practice restraint, honesty, and repair. Without those practices, every interaction becomes a negotiation. Every relationship becomes a risk assessment, and risk assessment is tiring. So, across cultures, many teachings nudge us toward kindness not only as virtue, but as a stabilizer. Kindness reduces uncertainty. It tells another nervous system you don't have to brace. And when others do not brace, you don't have to brace either. This is how gentle actions become a feedback loop. A small kindness invites a softer response. A softer response invites more kindness. Over time, a relationship becomes a place where the heart can rest. That is karma in the language of systems, a pattern that reinforces itself. But empathy has a shadow side too. We feel empathy more easily for people who look like us, speak like us, belong to our circle. This is why fairness requires intention. Fairness is empathy widened. It is deciding that a stranger's dignity matters too. And when you practice that widening, the brain can change. It can become more skilled at seeing the human in the unfamiliar. This is not instant, and it isn't sentimental. It is practice. So tonight, if you want a simple bedtime image, imagine empathy as a lantern. When the lantern is bright, you see the path clearly, and you step with care. When the lantern is dim, you bump into others, and you call it fate. Spiritual traditions often try to keep the lantern lit. Neuroscience explains how the lantern is built and maintained. Both are pointing to the same gentle truth. What you practice becomes what you see. And what you see shapes what you do. So we return again to the quiet power of small choices. A fair choice is not only good for the other person, it is good for your own mind because it keeps your inner world coherent. Coherence is calming. Now, we can name a common bedtime trouble that often hides inside moral thinking, the open loop. An open loop is a moment your brain has not filed away. A conversation that ended badly. A message you never answered. An apology you owe. A kindness you wish you'd offered. The brain hates open loops because open loops feel like unfinished learning. So it keeps returning to them like a finger touching a sore spot to check if it still hurts. This is one reason people lie awake with their eyes closed, replaying the same scenes. The brain is not trying to torture you. It is trying to solve. But some problems cannot be solved at midnight. So the question becomes, how do you close the loop enough to rest? This is where the moral language of repair becomes very practical. If you owe someone fairness, plan one clear action, a short message, a returned call, a repayment, a sincere acknowledgement, not a dramatic performance, just a simple step that moves reality toward alignment. When you form a concrete plan, the brain often quiets. It feels the loop beginning to close. And if the loop cannot be closed in the outer world because the person is unavailable or the time is gone, you can still close it inwardly. You can name what you wish you had done. You can let yourself feel the regret without turning it into identity. And you can choose one small action tomorrow that honors the lesson. This is not denial. It is integration. It is letting the mind digest an experience so it doesn't sit raw in the stomach of the night. This is also where kindness toward yourself becomes essential, because there is a version of karma thinking that becomes obsessive, as if you must repay every mistake with suffering. But suffering is not repair. Suffering is only suffering. Repair is specific. Repair is humble. Repair often includes doing better and then letting the past stop shouting. Many traditions, in different words, discourage despair for this reason. Despair freezes action. Hope, even quiet hope, makes repair possible. So tonight, if your mind is circling an open loop, you can choose a gentle phrase. I will repair what I can. I will learn what I can. And I will rest now, so I have the strength to live well tomorrow. This is not escape. It is wise pacing. A tired brain overreacts, misreads faces, and makes poorer choices. Rest is part of ethics. Rest makes fairness easier. And when you treat sleep as part of your moral life, not as laziness, but as maintenance, the whole idea of consequence becomes kinder. It becomes less about punishment and more about building a life that does not require so much bracing, a life with fewer open loops, a life with more quiet endings. And quiet endings are exactly what we are practicing now. There is one more gentle twist to notice before we move on. The way karma can become a lens you look through, shaping what you notice. If you believe the world is watching and scoring, you might become anxious, always trying to perform goodness. If you believe the world is chaotic and unfair, you might become cynical, saving kindness for those who earn it. But if you hold karma as a practice, cause and effect, intention and consequence, you can become steadier. You can choose kindness because it is the kind of world you want to build, even if outcomes remain uncertain. This steadiness has a measurable feel, a nervous system that expects betrayal scans for danger, a nervous system that expects some degree of fairness scans less. It spends less energy on vigilance. That energy is freed for creativity, patience, and rest. So beliefs matter, not only spiritually, but biologically. They tune the body. They decide whether your shoulders live near your ears or whether they can drop back to where they belong. They decide whether your breath stays shallow or whether it can widen. And because beliefs are learned, they can be revised. Tonight, we can revise one belief gently, that kindness is never wasted, even when it isn't returned, even when it isn't noticed, because it is not only a message to another person, it is also a message to your own mind. It says, I am the kind of person who does not add unnecessary harm. And that identity is calming. Fairness works the same way. When you choose fairness, you reduce inner conflict. You aren't split into the person you present and the person you hide. You are simpler, and simplicity is one of the great sleep aids. Of course, none of this means you must tolerate mistreatment. Kindness does not mean being a doormat. Fairness does not mean ignoring boundaries. Many traditions speak about justice precisely because boundaries matter. Repair is not possible when harm continues. So the gentle middle path is this: be kind, be fair, be clear. And when you must say no, say it without cruelty, so your body doesn't have to carry the aftermath. Now, in the next part of our story, we'll explore what happens when the world feels unfair, when outcomes don't match effort, when good people suffer, when consequences seem random, because that question is where moral ideas often become heavy. And our task for SleepWise is to keep it light enough to hold, to learn without tightening, to acknowledge the mystery without losing the calm. So for now, let your breath settle. Let the mind release the need to audit the universe, and hold on to one simple principle that nearly every tradition and much of science can agree on. Treat people with dignity, and your inner world becomes a quieter place to sleep. And now we come to the tender complication, the moment when the idea of karma in any language meets the unevenness of life. Sometimes the kind person gets sick, the careful person gets cut off, the honest worker is overlooked, and the cruel one seems to glide forward untouched. If you have ever watched that and felt your stomach tighten, you are not alone. The mind wants a clean equation. It wants to believe that effort guarantees outcome, that virtue guarantees reward, that harm guarantees consequence. Not because we love punishment, but because we love predictability. Predictability feels like safety. And when life breaks the equation, the nervous system reacts as if the ground has shifted. This is where karma thinking can become heavy, because the mind tries to force the world back into order. It searches for hidden causes. It blames the sufferer. It blames the universe. It blames itself. But there is another way to hold the unevenness, one that many spiritual traditions arrive at in their own voice, and that psychology often supports in its own quiet language. You can accept that outcomes are not fully controllable while still treating actions as meaningful. You can let life be partly mysterious while refusing to become careless. You can stop trying to manage the entire universe and instead manage the next choice. This is not resignation. It is focus. It is the difference between carrying the ocean in your hands and carrying one cup of water without spilling. In practical terms, it means you stop measuring your worth by what happened today, and you begin measuring by what you chose. Did you choose fairness when it would have been easy to cut corners? Did you choose kindness when you were tired? Did you choose truth when you could have escaped with a lie? Those choices matter even if the world doesn't immediately clap for them. And they matter in a way you can feel. Because your body relaxes when your inner life is aligned, even if the outer life is noisy. This is a kind of justice that doesn't depend on the weather. It is internal order. It is the quiet relief of not arguing with yourself. So tonight, if you feel the ache of unfairness, let that ache be seen, and then let it be set down. You don't have to solve why the world is uneven. You only have to decide what kind of person you want to be within it. And that decision, repeated gently, becomes a steadier ground than any outcome. As you breathe, imagine placing the impossible equation on a shelf, not to deny it, but to rest from it. The universe can be complicated, but your next breath can be simple. And simplicity at night is a mercy you can always give yourself. When scientists look closely at how people respond to unfairness, they often find two impulses living side by side. One impulse is the desire for justice. It's the part of you that wants repair, that wants harm acknowledged, that wants the world to be safe for goodness. The other impulse is the desire for meaning. It's the part of you that can't bear randomness and would rather invent a reason than admit uncertainty. Both impulses are human, but only one of them helps you sleep. Meaning-making can become a trap when it turns into blame. When something painful happens, the mind may say, "This must be someone's fault." Sometimes that is true, and accountability matters. But sometimes it is simply weather, biology, timing, accident. the intersection of millions of causes no single mind can trace. In those moments, forcing meaning can harden the heart. It can make you less compassionate to others and less gentle with yourself. So, a calmer approach is to separate two questions. The first question is moral. What is the right response to this situation? The second question is cosmic. Why did this happen at all? The moral question is often answerable. The cosmic question is often not. And bedtime is not the right time to wrestle the cosmic question into submission. So tonight, we practice answering only what can be answered. If you've been wronged, the moral response might be to set a boundary, to seek support, to speak clearly, to protect what must be protected. If you wronged someone, the moral response might be to repair, to apologize, to make amends, to change behavior. If you're simply caught in misfortune, the moral response might be to care for yourself, to accept help, to hold your own dignity with patience. Notice how each moral response is an action. It is something you can do, and that do ability is soothing because it gives the nervous system a handle. It turns helplessness into direction. Many traditions teach a version of this without using scientific words. Do what is right and leave the rest to God, or act without clinging to results, or plant good seeds and accept the season. These are different melodies, but the same calming rhythm. Focus on intention, focus on action, loosen the grip on outcome. So if your mind starts spinning tonight, why me, why them, why now, gently bring it back to the answerable. What is one small right thing I can do tomorrow? One kind message, one fair decision, one boundary spoken without cruelty, one quiet act of care. Then let the question of the universe remain open, the way the night sky remains open. Open doesn't mean unsafe. Sometimes open just means spacious, and spaciousness is where sleep likes to arrive. Now, with that spaciousness in mind, we can turn the idea of karma into something you can actually practice here in the dark without effort, not as a belief you must defend, but as a gentle compass. Because whether you think of karma as spiritual law, moral accountability, social consequence, or neural learning, the practical lesson is surprisingly consistent. Small actions shape the next moment. The next moment shapes the next. And soon, without fanfare, you are living inside the path you've been laying. So tonight, we practice the smallest version of that. We practice a soft inventory, not a harsh one. Not a courtroom, just a lantern. Ask yourself quietly, without strain, where was I fair today? You don't have to find a heroic answer. Maybe you listened when you were busy. Maybe you held your tongue instead of snapping. Maybe you paid what you owed, or you gave someone credit, or you didn't take the easy shortcut that would have harmed someone else. Let one example be enough, and let your body register it. Fairness can be warm. Then ask, just as gently, where could I be a little fairer tomorrow? Again, no drama. Maybe you'll reply to a message you've been postponing. Maybe you'll be clearer with a boundary. Maybe you'll apologize for a tone you don't like in yourself. Choose only one small thing, a single pebble, not a boulder. Now, bring kindness into the same lantern light. Where did I offer kindness today? And where could I offer it tomorrow? You might notice that kindness is often less about grand gestures and more about pace. Giving someone a moment, not rushing them, not treating them like an obstacle, letting your face soften, speaking as if you remember they have a life the way you do. And then, this is important, offer the same kindness to yourself, because a mind that hates itself rarely becomes kinder to others. Self-kindness is not indulgence. It is the soil that makes growth possible. If you made mistakes today, you can name them without stabbing yourself with them. You can hold them like smooth stones, learn their shape, and set them down. Tonight is not the time for punishment. Tonight is the time for rest, and rest is part of the practice, because you can't live fairly when you're depleted. A tired brain misreads, overreacts, and forgets what matters. Sleep replenishes the circuits that make patience possible. So, you can think of tonight's sleep as a quiet investment in tomorrow's goodness, not because you must earn anything, but because you want to move through the world with fewer sharp edges. Now, let the inventory fade, let the lantern dim. You've seen enough, and with that gentle seeing, you've already begun to change the direction of the next day. As we near the end of our story, we can gather everything into one simple image, not a doctrine, but a scene. Imagine a long hallway at night, lined with doors. Behind each door is a different language for consequence. One door says karma, another says repentance, another says justice, another says mercy, another says repair. You don't have to choose only one door tonight. You can walk the hallway slowly and feel what each door is pointing toward. They are pointing toward a life that is less tangled, a life where your actions match your values more often than they don't, a life where you don't need to rehearse excuses in the dark, a life where you treat people as if their dignity matters, because it does. And if you wonder what neuroscience adds to this hallway, it adds a quiet confirmation. The body pays attention. Your nervous system tracks the difference between alignment and conflict. When you live in conflict with your own sense of right, your body stays slightly braced, even if no one can see it. When you live with steadier integrity, the body releases. Not perfectly, not always, but more often. The breath deepens. The face softens. The mind wanders less. And wandering less is one of the great gifts at bedtime. So tonight, we let the big words become small. We let karma become one simple practice. Cause and effect held gently. We let faith become one simple practice. intention held sincerely. We let science become one simple practice, noticing what calms the body and repeating it. And we let kindness become what it has always been, across so many cultures and centuries, a way of making life more livable for everyone involved. If you are listening and thinking of someone you love, you can imagine offering them fairness in advance. Not a perfect fairness, just a steady one. A willingness to listen, a willingness to repair, a willingness to be gentle with power. And if you are thinking of someone difficult, you can still choose to release unnecessary harm. You can choose boundaries without cruelty, clarity without contempt. That, too, is a kind of karmic wisdom. You do not have to add more heat to a world that already has enough. And now, as the room grows quieter, you can allow yourself to stop carrying the moral weight of the entire universe. You are not responsible for everything. You are responsible for the next small choice. And tonight, your next small choice is simple. It is to rest, to let the body recover, to let the mind loosen its grip, to let the hallway of doors fade behind you as you step into a darker, softer room where nothing is required. Only breathing, only settling, only sleep. So now, let's return to the still lake. The pebble has already been dropped. The rings have already widened, and as they move outward, they become thinner, quieter, harder to distinguish from the surface itself. That is what we want for your thoughts. Not to fight them, not to force them to stop, but to let them thin and widen until they are simply part of the night. If your mind offers you a final question, was I good enough? Was I fair enough? Did I do it right? Meet that question with a gentler answer. I am learning. I am repairing what I can. I am choosing kindness where I'm able, and I am allowed to rest. Because the deepest wisdom in all these traditions and in the science of the body is that exhaustion makes everything harsher. Exhaustion makes impatience feel inevitable. Exhaustion makes fairness feel like work. Exhaustion makes mercy feel far away. Sleep brings mercy closer. Sleep gives you more room between impulse and action, more room to choose. So you can think of this night as a quiet reset of the inner instruments, the ones that measure, that predict, that worry. Let them set themselves down. Let the moral ledger close for now, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters enough to protect the energy you'll need tomorrow. If there is something you must repair, it can wait for morning. If there is something you must forgive, you can begin by forgiving yourself for being human. If there is something you must understand, you can trust that understanding returns more gently after rest. Tonight, the only thing you need to practice is softness, soft shoulders, soft jaw, soft breath, and a soft intention, simple enough to carry into sleep. May I be fair, may I be kind, may I do less harm. No pressure to perform it perfectly, just a direction, just a compass, just a warm light on a quiet path. Now let the lake become smooth. Let the last ring fade. Let the room hold you. Good night.